an American writer and illustrator known for her compelling storytelling and evocative illustrations. Notably, she received the prestigious Newbery Medal for her book Criss Cross, a captivating blend of vignettes, illustrations, photographs, and poems that offer a vivid portrayal of the lives of four small town teenagers. In addition to her Newbery Medal success, her picture book Home Lovely earned acclaim as a runner-up for the Boston Globe Horn Book Award. Furthermore, her novel All Alone in the Universe has garnered multiple accolades, including recognition as an ALA Notable Book and a Booklist Editor's Choice. Hailing from Cheswick, Pennsylvania, she draws inspiration from her hometown nestled in the picturesque Allegheny River Valley. Please join me in welcoming Lynne Rae Perkins.
Thank you for having me.
Do you have a favorite childhood book or author that has had a lasting impact on you?
It's probably the most complicated answer I'll have for you today. And so I have notes. So I grew up in a tiny little town, and my mother was actually a reading teacher. But she sort of taught reading as a life skill, not as a pleasure or something to enjoy. But my sister taught me to read when I was just 4 years old. She taught me how to sound out words, and from then on I was hooked. But in my childhood, I didn't read a lot of books that were actually published by then and are really renowned books. Like I never, as a child, read Where the Wild Things Are. I never read Charlotte's Web. And I don't know why. I think they just weren't available to me. But I read everything that was available. Our local library had a lot of old books, mostly biographies of people. And I would, there were these book clubs at school where you could pay 25 cents and get a paperback book. And I read those, and we got books at the grocery store. So, so what I was thinking about when I was thinking about this question is, what is the impact that those books have had on me? And I have 5 answers for those questions, and I have visual aids. So one of the things that I learned from those books was that you can learn how to do things from books. And for example, I got a magazine called Golden Magazine that was published by the Golden Book Company. And I loved it. I loved every month I got this magazine, and they would often have a page where they would teach you words in another language and how to sound them out. And I was sure I could teach myself to speak French and German and everything by reading this magazine. I taught myself how to knit from this book that I found in my mother's closet. And I still have the first thing I knit. It was this yellow scarf. I taught myself to knit. Other efforts were not quite as successful. For example, we had a golden book encyclopedia, and I tried to teach myself ballet by taking the positions in these illustrations, but they didn't really tell you how to get from one position to the next. So I would just try to imitate the positions. So that was not a super thing to try to learn, but I did learn that you could learn how to do things from books. Another thing I learned is that you can say a lot with a relatively simple line drawing. I loved reading Peanuts. His drawings are so expressive, Charles Schulz. And I loved the drawings, for example, in Dr. Seuss. Just a line drawing with a block of color, but they're so alive and so vibrant and expressive. So I learned that, and I think that sort of stayed in there somewhere. I learned that there are a lot of different ways that people live in a lot of different places. Part of this came from, for example, reading all the biographies there, because our library did have a full shelf of biographies. And then part of it was from things like, my aunt gave us this book called Christmas Around the World, and it had Christmas celebrations around the world in it. I mean, granted, it didn't point out to me that not everybody celebrates Christmas. I have a general sense that I read a lot of books about people who, through no fault of their own, were poor, but whose lives had value and honor. And somehow, the one that comes to mind is Five Little Peppers and how they grew. Their mother was always scrimping and saving and would save up to get a cup of sugar to make somebody a birthday cake. But I think that's why it comes as such a shock to me that today there are people who look down on people who are poor as if it is their fault and they are not good people. I'm always surprised by that. And I think one of the most important things that stayed with me from the books I read as a child is that kindness is always the best way to go. This was from a number of many kinds of books, but for example, when I was, I guess like in fifth grade or something, I read Blitz and King of the Wind, which are both stories about horses who go through a time of being mistreated and then someone is kind to them. I read both of these books probably a dozen times and wept every time I read them. The Forgotten Door by Alexander Key. It made a big impression on me because it was different than any other book I had read. It was about a boy who appeared that he was from another planet and he had fallen through this portal of some kind. I found that it was a really moving story, both that they were welcoming and that there could be another kind of life that people lived, because he came from a very peaceful kind of family. I didn't know till I was an adult that the version of Little Women I read was a severely condensed version. But this book made a big impression on me. And again, kindness was a really important feature of it. And it was called Readers. Well, they condensed articles from other places. So like something that might be a 15-page article, they made it into a 2-page article. So super easy. And then they also had Reader's Digest condensed books. So like this, there were 5 novels contained in this book. So one of them that I read, and I don't know how old I was, maybe I was 12, was by a writer named Rumer Godden, and it was called The Kitchen Madonna. It was about 2 children in London, and they get a new nanny, and she is from an Eastern European country and doesn't speak English very well, and she seems very unhappy. And they figure out that she is missing her icon, which is like a religious picture that is a painting of a saint or what, the Virgin Mary or something, and it has jewels and fabric on. So they make one for her. They go all over London collecting beautiful fabrics and shiny things, and they make one for her, and it makes her happy. So many stories like Rebecca of Sunnybrook Farm, Anne of Green Gables, Heidi. Kindness is the best way to go, and also that people who are apparently crabby on the outside can be quite kind inside. So I think that's my answer to your question. I could say more things. I could say, so when I was like, I'll say 2 more things. When I was about 10, my mother took me for lunch with a fellow teacher and the fellow teacher's mother, who was, probably my grandmother's age, of course. And this teacher's mother took me into her little library, and she talked to me as if I were an adult, as if I were an intelligent person. And she loaned me or gave me this book that I think is pretty well known, but I had never seen it. It was a children's version of Shakespeare stories. And I just remember the feeling of being talked to as someone who had intelligence and who could be part of the conversation was really a new and exciting feeling. And then I did want to also add that when I reached high school, Kurt Vonnegut became really big in my life. And I was fascinated by how you could tell a superficially maybe silly story and yet have really consequential things going on. So that's my answer to that question.
Also,
Yeah.
you talked about how you were learning German and French from this book. How good is your German and French ability now?
My French is pretty bad. I did study German in college and in grad school for a while, and I'll say more about this later probably. So I took Spanish in high school, and almost 4 years ago, I've always wanted to be more fluent in another language. And so 4 years ago, I thought, if not now, when? And so I started with an online program, and then I've gone to Guatemala twice, and we just got back from Argentina, where I practiced by jumping in the front seat with the Uber driver and making him talk to me. So, so my Spanish at the moment is better than any of the other ones, but
Criss Cross is such a unique novel and engaging novel, blending various storytelling elements. What inspired you to create this particular narrative?
so when I wrote Criss Cross, it was my second novel, and I really didn't know what I was doing. But our daughter at that time, I think, was about 13 years old. So I was thinking about my own adolescence, and something that I feel about my own adolescence is that I worried a lot. I worried, would someone ever love me? Would I ever figure out what I wanted to do with my life? And looking back as an adult, I thought, if I had if I had known that everything would work out okay, I think I would have had more fun. So I think I wanted to say to my own kids, you're doing okay. It's going to be all right. And so that was one of the motivations for it. But like any book, there's always more than one idea in a book. And I had a lot of different ideas that I wanted to play with. For example, I wanted a boy to like a girl, which could, of course, be any kind of relationship, but in this case, it was a boy and a girl. Not because she was beautiful, but because she knew how to do a lot of things. And so there's a scene where this boy meets Debbie, and she's at his grandmother's house. And in short order, she fixes the plumbing under the sink, speaks German to his grandmother, and knows that his grandmother has gone into diabetic shock and gives him a glass of orange juice, and then knows how to drive a stick shift to get her grandmother to the hospital. So that was one of the things I wanted to do. I mean, there were a lot of different things, but there's a part where Hector, the main male character, he says he felt his life opening up like the roof of the Civic Arena. The Civic Arena is gone now, but it used to be this building in Pittsburgh that had a round roof, and in good weather, they would open it up. And so I decided to make this little model and photograph it. And I did it by cutting apart a globe. And then because it's an arena, I made like stadium seating, and the people were little beads. And then I put Vaseline around the edge of my camera lens so that it would have fuzzy edges. This was a long time ago. And so I did all this. And I have to say that I was partly, part of the reason that I thought of doing that was that years ago, I worked for a while for a model railroad company where people built these, elaborate landscapes and buildings. And so I thought, well, I could do that. And then I sent it with the chapter to my editor, and I thought, she's going to think I've lost my mind. And she didn't say anything. She thought it made perfect sense. And so then I thought to myself, I can do anything I want. So that was a really freeing feeling. And it sort of led to my first book. My first novel, All Alone in the Universe, had a lot of line drawings in it. And in this book, I decided that Debbie's thoughts would be primarily expressed in line drawings visually, and that Hector's would be expressed in photographs. So there's a part where he's, doing the she loves me not thing. And so, um, so once I started doing those different visual things, then some different kind of writing things started popping up too. I just went with it.
Your childhood sounds like it was filled with adventure. How do those memories influence your writing and illustrations today?
I think I had a different kind of childhood, or a lot of people my age did, than kids have today, because there was a lot of freedom. We would say to our parents, we're going down in the woods. We're going down to the Boney Dump. We're going to go for a bike ride, and we're going to be gone all afternoon. and they would say, okay, be back by dinner. And so there was a lot less scheduling, a lot less planned activities. We just had to sort of roughly let them know where we were. There was something really nice and healthy about that. I think I grew up fairly naive in a way. We had some wonderful neighbors, but there were, like everywhere, there were people in our area who had real problems and serious problems. And I did not know about any of that until I was more grown up. But I mean, I guess that's pretty common. Um, I think that in both All Alone in the Universe and Criss Cross, my main characters figure things out faster than I did. I think I started writing All Alone in the Universe thinking, because I had had this friendship triangle that dragged on all the way through high school. And I thought, what if I had figured out within a year instead of over 6 years how to handle that situation or what that situation might be?
You mentioned that you've never really considered writing books until an encounter with Mrs. Ava Weiss, the art director of Greenwillow Books. Can
Mhm.
you tell us more about that moment and how it changed your perspective on storytelling?
So in college and in grad school, I was an art student. I studied drawing and printmaking. And I always thought that illustration might be something that I could do. And at some point, somebody who I had grown up with arranged for me to have a portfolio review with Ava Weiss. And she told me, what you want to do is take a well-known myth or fairy tale and do 6 drawings for it so that the art director can see that you can take a character through 6 situations and have them be, first of all, be recognizable from one picture to the other. And then secondly, that you can have, for example, different compositions, pictures that are different enough from each other to be interesting, but similar enough to feel like a cohesive whole. So I started looking at myths and fairy tales, and there wasn't one that I felt like drawing at that point. So I made up this little story in my head. This girl who moves with her single mom into a trailer in the middle of nowhere, and she finds some seedlings growing by the garbage can, and she thinks they might be flowers or trees. So she plants them along the driveway, and they turn out to be tomatoes and potatoes, and because they are things that fell out of the garbage can and just started to grow, which does happen. But I did several drawings of this story and showed them to Mrs. Weiss. She always went by Mrs. Weiss. And she told me that my work was publishable. And then she said, do you also write? And I never had. I mean, I had written, essays for school. I had never written any kind of fiction. Um, and I said, no, but I have some ideas. And she said, well, send us your ideas. And she gave me her business card. And I thought that she had seen something in me in my work that led her to think that I was a writer. And I found out later that this is a question that she asks every illustrator whose work she looked at. So, but anyway, I went home and I had been thinking about this little story I had made up. I had worked on my portfolio for months. And so I went home. It only took me 3 days to type it up just because I had been thinking about it for so long. And I sent it to them, and they called me and said they wanted to publish it and would I illustrate it. And so that was my very first book. And the second one was harder, but but after they published it, after they bought that story, I thought to myself, wow, maybe that's something I could do.
Before we conclude our interview, could you share with us any upcoming projects or works in progress that readers should be on the lookout for?
Sure. And that's one of the things why I talked about the Spanish. And I started making these little flashcards for myself for words I was having trouble keeping straight. For example, like it's cloudy, está nublado, hay nubes. And this is, está despejado, it's clear. And then just words I thought were interesting. For example, the word for scissors is tijeras. And the word for step ladder is escalera de tijeras, which is like ladder of scissors. So I thought that was really cool. Another really fun one was word for turkey is Pavel. You can do that.
Wow, that's so cool. It's like you take a still painting and make it like an interactive object.
Yeah, I know. That's what I'm trying to do. So, anyway, so the word for turkey is pavo, but the word for peacock is pavo real, which is like royal turkey, which I thought was really awesome. So, then I went to Guatemala again and took Spanish classes, and I wanted to do something about it as a book, and it ended up, it's a book that will be out next February, and it's about a young girl who travels to a Central American country with her dad and her grandmother to visit an old friend of the dad's. And while she's there, she learns some Spanish words and she makes a friend. The theme that came up in my mind was that tiny friendships hold the world together. Even the little ones where you just talk with someone for a few minutes, I think that holds the world together. But so some of the illustrations, there's a lot of illustrations. It's a novel, but there are a ton of illustrations, and some of them are like flashcards. For example, these are just photocopies because I don't have the book yet. And the artwork is all with the publisher. But for example, the word for a fish in the water is el pez, but as soon as it's caught, it's called el pescado. And if you think about it, pescado kind of sounds like pez, caught. Oh, get it? So that book is called At Home in a Faraway Place, and it will be out next February.
I want to extend my deep gratitude to Lynn for sharing her journey of creativity and storytelling. From her childhood adventures in Cheswick to her award-winning novels and picture books, Perkins' passion for literature shines through. We eagerly anticipate her future books and the continued enrichment she brings to readers of all ages. Thank you, Lynne Rae Perkins, for inspiring us with your words and artistry.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a lot of fun.